In this video, we're going to talk about editing steel stitches, and I'm bringing up this example from what we use when we were working on creating steel stitches. And so in this one, we're going to focus on how to edit it. And the editing of steel stitch is, when we're talking about the outline or the shape, is pretty much identical to working with artwork or a run stitch or any outline shape. If I go to shape edit, which is this icon right here, I have to have it selected first, but once it's selected, this becomes available, or I can click it right here. And when I click on that, you'll see that I get to see the points or the nodes that are making up this shape, right? And I can edit any of these. And if you want to find information on what all you can do with the outlines, I'm not going to focus on that in this lesson because I went into great detail on that on the editing lines with the artwork tool. So make sure you watch that, and it will tell you all about editing these nodes or these lines, getting the shapes, restructuring the shape. It all can be found there. The only thing I'll talk about in this one is your start point and your end point. And the green dot is your start point and the red dot is your end point. And you can move it around to wherever you want. But what all this means is it's going to start stitching at the green dot and end at the red. Now, when I say start stitching, I'm talking about the first stitches. So that can even be just the underlay. And so let's go ahead and do a slow redraw here and just see what this looks like. I did mess that up a little bit at the end. I didn't realize that I had messed with that point there. Let's go slow redraw. For some reason this is like really lagging, and I apologize. So this is the start and end point. It started and ended at the same spot there. Let me come in here. I want to find where I have other stitches, and I'm just gonna delete those stitches there. Oh, no, I do need them. Sorry. So working with this, you have your start points and your end points that you can play with, and again, that's just where it's going to start and where it's going to end. Right mouse click, and for some reason this is being kind of weird. There we go. It could be just in this recording software. So here we go. This is, it was starting up here. It's going to end over there. So it started there. And like I said, it doesn't mean that the satin's going to start there. It just means it's going to start the shape there. And that's why you saw it actually start the satin right here, because it's going to end right here, and it's going to put these two together, these two ends. So watch how that goes and it finishes off. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're dealing with that start and end point. Other than that, editing the shape, you can learn about that in the artwork section of editing artwork. But let's talk about the properties, because this is really what we need to focus on and dealing with a steel stitch and what we can do to edit it. By default, it's 2.5 millimeters wide for the steel stitch. I can change that to whatever I want. A lot of applique, for example, is around 3.5 to 4. So you can see if I choose 3.5 here, you can see it makes this line much thicker. I could go down to like 1.4 to 1.5 is the smallest you could really do. And you can see that's a pretty small, thin stitch. So let's go and just make it a 3 and hit apply. The next thing that you have is you have the ability to change the density. 0.5 is the default. I like to work with 0.4s. I think that gives you full coverage, the best full coverage, and you can see that just made the stitches tighter. So watch what happens when I hit undo. You're going to see more white space between the stitches. See how that is? So the lower the number, the tighter the density. So I'm going to change this to 0.4 and hit apply. So some of the other things, I'm going to come back to this corner type, but I want to address a couple of these other things. This angle, I can actually angle these stitches. So if I do, you can see from a -60 to a 60. So let's see what happens when I do 60. and hit apply. You can see that there are some issues here, and it all takes place wherever there's a corner. See how that works? Let's go to 30. So if you're doing a straight line, it might work better, or if you're not angling it quite as much. So let's see what happens when I go down to 20. That looks like it works pretty good, and what it's doing is it's angling these stitches. So they're not going straight up and down, they're angled 20% there. And let's go ahead and select it. And this time let's go to -20. So the stitches are going this way now. They should be going this direction after I change it. See how that works? So you can adjust it. If you're working with a straight line and you don't have corners, you could go quite a bit more and not have an issue. Right? It's only doing that because we're coming to a corner. So it's angling it just fine. It's just it looks funny on the screen because of the angles are not, lining up, but it is doing it the way that it should be doing it for that. But if I go and I create just a line here and I make it a steel stitch, let me zoom into it, and let's go ahead and just do a 60, which is the most I can do. You can see that it does it 60 degrees. And if I go to undo, you can see that it's maintaining the same width here. So even though it's angling it, it's not making it skinnier when it angles it. It keeps the same width of the 2.5 on this one. So watch that again when I go to 60. And by width, I mean it should line up with these two guidelines that I'm creating when I hit apply. See, it's still maintaining the same width in this area. So just wanted to point that out. If I go to -60, it should go the opposite direction. And this is the most extreme. Again, you might do something more like a 25, and that will just give it a kind of a different look and feel. So that's how you can use that. Let me go back to 0 on this. And the next thing is the offset. And so what that is right now it's at 50. And so what that means is I'm clicking and dragging this line so you can see where the line is. When I release it, half of the stitches will be above this line and half of them will be below this line. That's saying that the line is right in the middle. See how that is? If I move it a little bit, it keeps that line right in the middle. So if I want to change that, because sometimes it is kind of useful when you're doing an outline around something, I could make this a 20. And now what you'll see is, see how that line is down there? It's 20% on this side and 80% on that side of the line. So if I do 80, it'll be the opposite. It'll be 80 from the line coming down and 20 above it. So watch how this is. See that line? Totally different direction or different spot. So you can modify it. So if you're trying to get something to line up around something, you can utilize that. And let's go ahead and look at it from this example right here. I'm going to select this one. And I'm going to put this back to 0 and hit apply so that I'm not doing the curve. Let me also go ahead and drag this line back down. So everything right now is lining up with the outline. And you can see that if I drag this out of the way, I'm going to drag it into place. You can see that it's actually just going right around the artwork that's in the back. And so right now the line is 50%. It's in the middle of it, so 50% to the left and 50% to the right. So if I change that to 80 and hit apply, now what it's going to be is 20% from the line going to the left and 80% to the right. And so this can really help you to get things to line up the way that you want. give you a little bit more room or bring it in tighter. That's how you utilize it. If I made this a 1.5 for the density, you can see that it's pretty light, but you can tell that it's mostly off of the shape. If I go to 80, it's going to bring it in. When I did things like tackle twill, I would be 80% on the fabric and 20% off. So that can give you an idea of how you can utilize that tool. You just outline it, and then you can modify it right here to get it to be 80% on an applique fabric and 20% off of it, or if you wanted it 70% on the fabric and 30% off, you could change it like that. So that's one way you could use that. The next thing is repeats. Now this is something that's pretty cool. This works with the satin too. So if I choose like a 5 and I hit apply, it's going to repeat 5 times before moving on. Let's go ahead and let's get to that section here, and let's just check it out. It's not actually doing it right now, and I don't know why. Let's see if I did hit apply. So I did do that. Let's go to 0. Hit apply. So for some reason that is not working, because what it's supposed to do, there, it's working now. So you can see that I had a 5. It must have been because of the angle. So I have a 5 repeat right here. And so how that works is it's watch how it creates this. Okay, so there's where it's going to the next line. It'll go forward, back, forward, back, forward, and then go to the other line. Forward, back, just like a bean stitch. This is in fact basically a bean steel stitch. It's working the same way as a bean stitch for a run stitch would work. It's allowing you to do repeats over the top of in the width section. It's really cool. It can make a really cool hand look, and it'll make it look like you're using thicker thread. It's kind of a fun thing to work with. Let me go back to 1 and hit apply. So you can explore that if you want. Here's the other thing that we have that we can do with the steel stitch. I'm going to focus on this one because it'll be easier because it's a straight line. We have a start line cap and a stop line cap. This is based off of where the start point is and where the end point is. So if I have a start point over here and the end point over here, take this back to 0. 50. What it's going to do is allow me to control what cap I use at the start or the end. So right now it's standard, meaning it's just going up and down. But I have the option to do rounded, sharp, 45 point, or 135 cut point. So standard, you know what it looks like. It's right here. Let's do rounded and hit apply. And just notice what it does. It rounds that corner. This is really cool. And I can come in here, and for the stop line, I can make it something different. So I can make it a sharp point. And you can see it's not rounded. This one's rounded a little. This one's sharp. Or I could make it something like a 45-degree cut, like that. So I hope that this kind of shows you some of the things you could do, because one of the things you might do is a rounded on both ends, and you can see that it rounds that out really nice. So you're no longer limited to just having it be squared off at the end like this. You can now change it using these tools. Now, let's take a look at this. If before the start and end point were at the same spot, so let's move the start and the end point to the same line and see what happens. If I go to rounded for the start line, it moves it over here. If I go to rounded on the end line, it moves it over here. So it does know that you're trying to go on two different sides, but because the start point and end point are on the same side, you might have to switch which one you use if you're going to mix it up. Just wanted to point that out. So the next thing that we need to do is look at this corner type here, okay? And it's kind of like a twofold thing with the corner types. Let's go ahead and zoom into this one. And I'm going to take this all the way back to kind of normal here. And it is offset a little bit. And I need to do 50% here, sorry. So that it's back to normal. What we're doing is we're looking at the way that it handles corner types. You can see that right now it's doing sharp, meaning it's kind of a sharp point at the ends. If I change this to bevel, watch what happens in the areas where it changes direction and it's kind of split. Hit apply. You'll notice that this kind of caps it off. It's no longer going to a straight point. If I zoom in here, it'll give you a little bit better of an idea of how this kind of works. So let me go back to sharp. You see it goes to a sharp point. Go to bevel. It kind of cuts it off into a bevel form. And then if I go to round, let's take a look at that. It kind of rounds the edges there. See how that works? That's default is sharp. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is show you what else you can do, because we have the ability to, when we're working with a steel stitch, to affect the corner. Like we have this tab called corner, and this is where you can go further in the corner. This is corner type. This is corner style. So you can see mitered is used, and that's how it's mitering this corner. If I come over here and I do lapped and hit apply, notice the different thing it does. It overlaps one into the other. I don't know if you can tell, but let's go ahead and come in here. Right here you can see it goes all the way to the edge here. Then the next one comes down and goes over the top of it. It laps it. This is a very good corner type to have. Let's also come over here and let's take a look at what open corners is. This is something that's utilized in, it's kind of a lace feature, and it's meant to be open on the ends. And instead of trying to angle in and angle out of the corner and, miter it and all that, it's just treating it like it's a separate line, if you will. Like if this one came straight across and ended, this is how this line would end. This one would start like that. So open corners. Let's look at auto and hit apply. So this is a really cool feature. It's actually giving you a capped corner right here. And a capped corner, what it is, stitches come in and then it stops and it runs out over here, and it comes and it goes all the way from here to here to where the other one will start, and then it continues on with a regular satin. This type of corner works when you're dealing with a smaller area here, like 5 millimeters or less as the most distance, because the bigger it is, the more it's going to pull in. So you don't want to do it when there's like 7 to 9 millimeters in here, because then that just makes it not kind of keep a straight line. So you want to be careful with it, but it's automatically doing this based off of the size of this angle. So let's zoom out, and you'll notice that it doesn't do that capped corner here because it would have to be a really long stitch. So capped corner is, and doesn't do it here either, because it's going to try to come all the way across in this corner and make a triangle, and this would just be too far of a distance from here to here. But when we're dealing with this one, when it makes that triangle, it's only going from a distance to here to here. So that's why it's able to do it on this one. So let's take a look at how that looks when it stitches out. It's one of my favorite techniques to use. So you can see it goes to this point, stops, it runs to the edge, and then it does this satin, and then it continues on. So it's basically three objects here, but with the steel stitch. So it's kind of a cool feature. I do this a lot with lettering. I use this technique. And let's come over back over to here. But you did see that it does change according to the distance for this little triangle piece. However, the distance is right there. The other one we didn't look at, we already had mitered on there, is the auto turn. And let's do that and hit apply. And so auto turn, what it does is it just turns the corner. Now this is not something you'd want in this corner. This is a really sharp corner here. So let me take it off 3D view and let me turn on the stitch points and let's zoom in a little bit. And I'll just show you why you don't really want to have this type of an angle. Notice that, when you do a stitch, it goes from side to side. There is the same number of stitches in this area right here as there is in this area. So it's having to just bunch all of these stitches up. And it is dropping some of them inside, but this is going to look bulky and it's not going to lay well, and it's not something that you want to have happen. There's just too many stitches right in this area, and then it's pretty loose out over here, and that just doesn't work well with embroidery. So you definitely would not want an auto turn. What I would recommend is using the default and then just coming over and choosing auto to see what one it actually ends up using, because auto is going to do all based on the angle of the corner. So in this case, it's doing a nice overlapping there. Let's go and let's select this guy right here, and let's just take a look at it. And you can see it's using a sharp here, but if we go over to corner, it's mitered, and if I hit auto, let's see if anything changes here. Not much. It did change a little bit right here, and let's go ahead and zoom in, and I'm going to hit undo. And you can see that when we first created this steel stitch, it decided to break it up. Well, when I chose auto, it's looking at the angle of that corner, and it's going to say, you know what, that's a pretty open corner there that I can just automatically turn that corner. And so you can see that it's pretty smart feature. And so you might want to look into that when you're creating steel stitches, converting something to a steel. Let's go ahead and take a look at this guy. This will be an interesting one too. Corners are very important with satins and steel stitches. So I am spending quite a bit of time on this because it's important to know how to get the look you want. So first I'm going to start here on this main tab. I'm going to change that to a bevel, and let's just take a look at the bevel. Notice how it shortens that up quite a bit. That's a little bit more like the original was supposed to be. Let's go round and hit apply, and you can see that that one is quite a bit different too from the sharp. See how that is? Let's now come over here to the corner style, and let's choose auto and see what it does. So auto is capping. You can see it chose to cap this corner and made that little triangle right there. Let's go ahead and choose, we already saw mitered. Let's do auto turn. Is probably not going to be one you'd want to use because you can see it's trying to turn the corner there. Not a good idea. Lapped might be okay here. Let's click on it. You can see it really kind of changed things up quite a bit actually. And I'm not sure why it did all that, but I just had to move that start point. But you can see it laps those corners. In my opinion, let's go to this one and choose bevel. And I don't think it'll let me, no, it won't let me change this type here. If I do bevel and auto, it's just not going to work as well. Typically, if you're going to change the corner type, you keep that at sharp and then you change it in here. So you can just play around with it and see what works best for the given situation. And it might be that mitered works best. Now, the other thing to keep in mind right here in this corner is this is the mitered overlap distance, and this is really important because basically it's mitered. When it miters, you need a little overlap so that it won't create like a little gap between stitches. So by default, it's giving you 1 millimeter. If I do 2, I'm not sure if it'll do very good here, but yeah, that gives you even more overlap, and that's not a bad thing to have more overlap. It just means that it's going to not show fabric in the areas where it's mitered. So something to keep in mind. 1 is generally good enough though. And so that's how you can affect the corners. The next thing that we need to focus on is underlay. So underlay options are in the underlay tab, and you can apply any of the ones that are not grayed out. So I can do a contour. I can do a, and you can see this is what it looks like. Stitches are going this way. And what it is going to do this little box. It's going to be inside of the stitches so it doesn't poke out. But that's what a contour does. And let's hit apply, and you can see if I do a slow redraw here that it's going to do one line around the outer edge, and then it's going to come on the inner edge, and then it's going to do a satin that goes over the top of that. That's a contour. Let me go ahead and hide that artwork. And if I come back over here, you have parallel, and you can keep multiples on here. You don't have to keep just one, but parallel is a little different. What it does is it's like a little zigzag, and that's what it looks like. You can see how the corners even affect that. Let's go back to underlay. Center line is a very popular one when you're doing a steel stitch, and all that is I must not have hit apply. It's just like a run stitch that goes down the middle of the structure. So other underlays, you have zigzag, and all that is just like the parallel, but it comes back upon itself. That gives you more loft, and you'll see here that it's going over and making like an X, and you can see that it's quite a bit of underlay. Mesh is really kind of a feature for doing lace, and we'll just show you what that looks like really quick. So you can see that it's doing these lines, and they're going back and forth, and it's continuous, and so it's creating that the stitches are going in the opposite direction, and you can see then it's going to come back, and it's going to do these little stitches that go back and forth like this. Kind of hard to see there, but you can see it a little bit better right here. You can see that it's helping you create a freestanding lace steel stitch. Majority of the time I'm using either parallel or center line, and I want to show you something with this. If I go to center line, you don't have any options right here for density and stitch length. If I come to parallel, you'll notice that I can change this to a 2, and all that's going to do is loosen this up. Okay, so when I hit apply, it's not going to be so tight of a zigzag here. You can kind of see how that affects it. Let's go and let's hit the selection tool, and I'll go back to 1 so you can see that. And see how much tighter that is. So the stitches are closer together. They're 1 millimeter apart as opposed to 2 millimeters apart. The other thing is, if I go to the inset, you can't really see, but you can see this green line, but then the other stitches that are above it. Basically, this inset is the amount of distance between the underlay and the outer edge. Okay, so if I want to get this closer to the edge, if I go to 0 and hit apply, it's going to go out to that edge. It's not going to be indented at all. And that's not something that I recommend. I definitely probably keeping it at the default there at 0.3. But when you're dealing with a contour, if I select that one, you might even want to go to a 0.5 for the contour. You don't want it too close to the edge or else it'll start poking out. And you might have seen that before when you digitize something, you stitch it out and there's these little loops that go around the outside after you stitch it out and you're like, why is that loop out there? Well, it's actually the underlay poking out. And so if you get it too close to the edge, that underlay, if you get these lines right here too close to the edge, it can actually pop out and create this little loop effect. And so if you've ever seen that, that's why. That's what happened. So that's underlay. And the other things you can do is we have this column tab that allows me to do things like a jagged edge. Let's go back to the other design. Let's go to this one right here. Select it. I'll go to that column. And you can do a jagged edge on both sides, the first side or the second side. Let's take a look at first side. And let's just make it like a 3. So that's going to make it jaggedy on one side. You can see how that works. It makes a jagged edge. So you can see the possibilities here. Let's do the second side and hit apply. And it goes the other direction. If we do both and hit apply, you can see that it's doing it to both sides. And this just turns up or down the jagged options. Let's do this. And this is actually bringing it inward instead of pushing it outward. So just something to keep in mind. You can go negative or positive values. So that's a jagged edge. Let me go back over to it. And let's do none. Go back to original. And let's come over here to this one. This is just your push and pull compensation. So you have the ability to add pull and push. And I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to go to this line right here. Zoom into it here. Okay, and select it. And basically, I'm going to copy it and paste it. And the one that's before it, I'm going to turn it to artwork. I was trying to fill it. Oh, it's a single line. Sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. Trying to fill in a single line. My bad. Okay, so we're looking at this one, and we're going to go to push and pull compensation. And we're at absolute value. And you have the option for a percentage or absolute. A percentage would be, right now it's at 100%. If I did 105%, it's going to actually make it 105% bigger. If I drag the line a little bit, you can't really tell what's going on. Let me zoom in here and let me go to undo. And you can see right there that in the percentage, if I go up to even 110, just notice the thickness of the line. Pull compensation is added in the direction the stitches go. It's very important. And if I hit apply, you can see that it extends those out by the 10%. Let me go ahead and come into absolute. I typically work with absolutes because on satin stitches, I typically do about a 0.3 for pull compensation. And that just added 0.3 to both sides. And it is on both sides because I have it selected as both sides. But I can do it to one side or the other or both. And push compensation is at the end. So as the stitches are going this way, push compensation brings it back because stitches grow because of the weight of the thread. It will actually push out when it stitches. So you have to back them up so that it ends up being at the size you want. I don't know if that makes sense, but If you're part of the Digitizing Masterclass, you know there's a whole section on push and pull compensation with each stitch type. So let's go ahead and add, I like to use by lines. And if I choose one line, it's going to back it up a line. And you can see that it didn't really do anything on this one. And it might be because I'm using these little caps. But let's look, because they're, let's do 2, hit apply. And you're noticing it's not backing that stitch up. Let's go to millimeters and do 0.3 and hit apply. And for some reason, it's not wanting to, the push compensation isn't wanting to work on the steel stitch. And I'm actually not all that surprised. And the reason I'm not is because I did notice that there was some kind of a little bug with the software that had to do with steel stitches. And so I'm sure that that's something that will be addressed, but it's supposed to back the stitches up a little bit, and it's not doing that. And so let's move on to the next one, because that was the push and the pull. And we have quality control type. This allows you to do splits. So I know this video is kind of long. There's a lot that we're covering in it, and I do apologize. Let me go in here and change this to a 5 millimeter width, so it's much wider. And let me go ahead and put in 3D. If I come over here and I choose to have a middle split and hit apply, you can see it didn't do anything. And the reason it didn't is because I'm at like a maximum stitch length of 8. If I change that to like a 3, you're going to see that it's actually going to do a split down the middle. So it just allows you to do a middle split, an absolute. I can do it by a percentage, and I can even do like a random. And you can play around with that. It is handy at times, especially when you're working on something that is definitely pretty wide. You can have it split. An absolute split would be like you're only letting it go a certain number of millimeters before it drops a stitch, is what that means. It's absolutely going to drop a stitch at a certain stitch length. And you have a minimum and a maximum stitch length that it can be. So those are things you can play around with, and it's kind of fun too. Then you have your start and end commands, just like we had with a run stitch. So you can do a jump at the start of it, so it jumps before it starts. You can do a trim to make sure after it does the previous object, it trims before it starts this one. A stop, so that it stops and lets you, maybe you have to lay fabric down or you have to do something to the design, or you can have it stop. And it doesn't work with every machine, like I explained in a previous video. So you have to play with that to make sure that the machine will stop. And how it's designed to work is it'll stop, let you do whatever you need to do, and when you hit start again, it will pick back up. And then you have a frame out, and that's the same thing. It may or may not work on your machine, but a frame out, basically at the start of the command, once it finishes the previous object, the frame is designed to move out of the way of the needle. And if you're a commercial machine, that means it'll come right toward you and allow you to maybe lay down fabric or cut fabric around a tack down stitch of applique. And then when you hit start, it'll move back into place and start going again. It's kind of a cool feature. Default's normal. Then you have your basic or your triangle tie in and tie off. That just means it does a lock stitch before it starts creating it for a tie-in, or after it's done stitching that object, it'll put in a tie-off. And you can choose none, which means it wouldn't do a tie-off. That just prevents it from unraveling, and so you definitely need to work with lock stitches, and you can learn more about that at in the master class. There's a whole unit on it. So now we need to look at general. And general is kind of a cool thing as well, because in the general tab, you have sharp, which this is meaning the connection point. So it basically comes up and then it moves over to the next position, comes up, moves over to the next position. If I change that to zigzag, instead it just goes up and over. So if I hit apply here, you'll see that it actually will change the look of this. And I'll go off a 3D view. You can see it's doing a zigzag. The sharp, which is default, looks like this. It goes up and then it goes over to the next point. And this is the density right here, whatever you have set, however many millimeters apart it is. It goes straight up and then over, straight up, over. That's a standard satin stitch is created that way. You can do a zigzag. I recommend it more when you're needing to do something like an open end, like this. So it kind of allows you to create that little zigzag look that's open. You can see fabric underneath of it. You also have square, and what that does is it kind of comes up and over, down and over, up. It's just creating a squared look. You have to be kind of careful with that because that can be a really short stitch length right there. So you have to be very careful when using that one. The other one that's really cool is one side, and watch what happens here. So if I put in 3D view, you can see that it comes and goes over. It's kind of like a blanket stitch would be. It's really a cool effect that you can use on your designs, and it just gives you the ability to make something look kind of sketched as well. So that's one side, and it all depends on where your start and end points are, because right now the edge is up here. If you want the edge down here and it be open on that side, you might have to play around with it a little bit. And let's just see what happens if I switch these two and then right mouse click. It's still doing the same thing. And so you really have to play around with it, and sometimes you have to start all over. When it was created going this direction. I might have to actually create it going the opposite direction when I'm digitizing it to get it to do that. Let's go to steel, and with the steel, let's make it a 2, like kind of like I had the other one. And let's just see if this works. It does. So because I digitized it going from left to right, it put this line at the top. And when I digitized it going right to left, it put that line at the bottom. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you need to change the direction, you need to digitize it the opposite direction. You can't just change the start point and end points. So those are the different connection ends that you can change. The last thing is just you can change the size, width, and height, standard for every object you select, and you can rotate it a little bit. So I won't go into that, but that is working with the Steil stitch, and there's a lot of things you can do with it. There was a lot that we covered, and so I do apologize for that, but there was a lot of important things that you need to know how to do with the Steil stitch. So thanks for your attention, and we'll see you in the next video.